A very good, large mistake I made when I was in the corporate sector was to think that the relationship with my boss was always in the benefit of my career. I'm not going to say something very bad about this because the mindset is your career path. Number one interest for them. It's a lie to say that the number one interest for a person is the company's objectives. That's the second. It's because you're measured through this and you're getting a compensation when you get those. But the first is your career path. If you want to be very high up, a lot of things happen in the corporate diplomacy. So I learned that the hard way. In a startup, especially when you're the founder, it's about life. It's about survival. It's survival mode at the beginning. You don't have a lot of chances. I mean, you can test, but you don't have a lot of chances of failure. And if you fail, it's over. So the pressure is a lot bigger when you're an entrepreneur.
Welcome to the first episode of Entrepreneur versus Executive Mindset, the podcast where we break down the fundamental differences, similarities, and challenges between these two worlds. I'm Juan, and today I'm joined by Joaquín, a senior leader with experience across industries such as mining, pharma, and microfinance. But what makes him really interesting is that he is also an entrepreneur. He is a founder of Boom Studies, an educational consultancy, and CAPS, a corporate affairs consultancy firm. So he is someone who has lived both worlds, leading with big organizations and also building his own businesses. In this episode, we're going to dive into his journey, talk about the difference between executive and an entrepreneurial mindset, and see what each side can actually learn from the other.
Hi, Joaquin. How are you? Thank you for joining us. It's a pleasure to having you here in this channel. Thank you for your support. As everyone might know, Joaquin is my business partner. We co-founded Boom Studies 6 years ago. It's been a very fruitful journey together. So, Joaquin, if you don't mind, can you introduce yourself, please, to the audience?
Sure. First, I want to thank you for the invitation. I think it's a really great effort, what you're doing, speaking about, the differences, what is opposing entrepreneurs and people from the corporate area, but also what are the bridges and how they can work together and add value. So I congratulate you for the effort. In a nutshell, I can say that I am an entrepreneur made through life. I really enjoy this. I wouldn't be able to come back to my previous corporate, profile or roles, but I understand those very well because I've been there. And it's not that I don't enjoy them, but I actually prefer the entrepreneurship, right? I can define myself as a very international person because I've lived abroad all my life. I was born in Peru and I lived there until I was 8 years old. But then my parents went to Costa Rica, and then my life as an expat, an eternal expat, started there. And I really enjoy that. I am currently based in Paris, which is my favorite city in the world by far. And I love being here despite being a tough environment for entrepreneurs. But in any case, you need to do what you need to do, right?
Yeah, sure. So, okay, now that you have letting us know that your mindset is more focused in the, let's say, in the entrepreneurial side, right? Let's start about your professional journey, your origins. I mean, how was everything when you start in the corporate sector?
Well, yeah, to be honest, I didn't start in the corporate sector. I started with intergovernmental projects. So my first job after my master's degree, I can speak about other roles, while being in university and stuff. But I would say my first real job was after my master's degree. It was a project funded by the European Commission in human rights. in Latin America, specifically in the Andean region. Well, that was a very interesting way to come back to Latin America after some years living in France, but also understanding what are the things that I like and I don't like. The project had a very good impact, but it was very, very much administrative. I mean, my role was a lot of reporting, and I found myself that I wanted more action than that. So after that, I transitioned into other more more specific, doable, actionable jobs. It took me a while to get into a corporation. After that, I worked in the microfinance sector, funded by big mining companies in Peru, which are the backbone of the local economy. And I was living in rural areas, so I got a chance to understand how other people think, very different people from, what I was used to, and learned a lot about that. And that's where I transitioned to a big mining company. So it took me a while. It took me a couple of experiences before getting into a corporation as such. But I got some experience in the NGO, international cooperation, and also a bit of experience in the public sector, understanding a lot what I didn't want in my life, right? And that's the beginning of the corporate adventure. When I started in this company, this is a large mining company from Peru. So it has, at the time, it had more than a dozen different mining sites, one of the world's leading silver producers, and joint venturing with some very big American companies exploiting the largest gold mine in Peru. So you could see how the corporate life and threads were impregnated in everything. The first thing that struck me was a very clear onboarding process, unlike what happened in the previous experiences. So they get you into this corporate mindset, like right away, the things that you need to do, the things that you need to know, and also getting a lot of advices from people on how to build your career. And this is something that struck me right away, that people really live that, they live to have a career. I'm not saying this is good or bad. I'm just saying that the mindset of the corporation is to get you into their culture. If they succeed, you will be always happy by going to the next step and even doing lateral promotions or whatever, right? But feeling that you're accomplishing something in your professional life, which might be true because you're learning things from different areas and such. But at the end of the day, is getting you involved into the corporate culture. And this corporate culture, specifically for this company, was a bit difficult for me to grasp because it was a Peruvian culture. And I was not really a guy raised in Peru. I was born in Peru, but raised abroad. And there were things, and also the mining world can be a very traditional world, with engineers and all those people having to stay for 20 days in a row in a mining site. Women are 10% or 15% of the workforce. So it's a very structured, traditional way of working. And also, a mining company doesn't have the commercial pressure that I learned afterwards when I was in the pharma sector, because they are more orientated to production.
So if I could ask Joaquin, what were the skills that you gained working in the mining sector?
Well, first, it was, first thing to be very clear about the role that you have and how you're supporting the objective. This is very clear in a corporation, right? For a mining site, if you work in corporate affairs, as I used to, your objective is to have the mine working, not being paralyzed. And then you have to implement projects and speak with stakeholders and whatever. But if there is a paralyzation of the production, then you failed, right? So being constantly reminded of the objective is something that the corporate structure has in a very clear way. And these objectives are not made by you. They are made by higher stands, the board of directors, what these shareholders are asking, right? So sometimes it feels a bit too far away from your scope of action, that you have a limited scope of action. You understand why you're doing things. Processes are very clear. Procedures are very clear. They try to go always into efficiency, into making things work better. You need to be always having new skills, participating in trainings, and gaining new aptitudes. And the corporation invests a lot in the trainings and in the people that, at least, that they have the right profile to do things. But I really understood the importance of structure and clarity and procedures. Actually, I was in charge of putting in place some procedures for the area I was working for, and this was a whole new world for me, right? The structure, it's a very complex thing, but it has to be this way for large corporations to work.
As far as I know, Joaquín, you co-founded Lapis, right? Lapis, if I'm not mistaken, it was an editorial firm, right? So you co-founded Lapis where you were working in this big mining sector. So what were your main challenge in that moment when you started?
Well, I didn't have the mind of an entrepreneur at the time. I just wanted to participate in a project that had meaning for me. I have always been very close to culture and literature. I like writing myself, etc. And this opportunity was presented to me by a group of older partners that were very much in that sector, right? So for me, it was like an opportunity to contribute from a place I enjoyed. And also, I was not aware at all of the stakes and the implications of creating a company. It's just that when it was presented to me, the timing was right, because I was spending 20 days in the mining site and then 10 days off. That was like the cycle, the working cycle. So with the 10 days off, I had some time, and I thought it could be a very good use of my time to be implicated in such a venture. But at the end of the day, it's not a startup, because it was never conceived as a startup for the purposes of growth or escalation. It was just like a company. I learned a lot about management, about administration, about structural things of a company. But to be clear, it was not at all a startup mindset. The other thing I learned is that I really liked doing projects like that. And that was like the beginning of the taste of the entrepreneurial life. But I was spending a lot of my time working in the mine, and focus was on my main job, like the money maker, if you want, right? The other one at the moment was not as serious as, but it's like a sandbox. And it was for me a good way to learn some things.
Did something change on you when you started to explore, let's say, that entrepreneurial side?
Yes. We were a large group of partners, and I thought that it was very difficult to make decisions when you have a large group of co-founders, and they were senior people, like more experienced than I was, for sure. I was the youngest by far, even though I had the role of general manager at the beginning of the company, but other people were more in the operation, to be honest. And I learned that I wanted to do something in the entrepreneurial world, but I would prefer having more saying, that I would prefer to lead. That's something I felt, but I understood that I needed to learn a lot before having that role afterwards. But that really unveiled something in me.
You were saying that you start this entrepreneurship company, right? In your spare time, where you were working in the mining sector. Do you think someone who wants to start a company, It's possible to do it while you are working?
Depending on your role. If you want to lead, no, for sure not. If you want to contribute, maybe as a capitalist investor, yes, sure. You can be in that safe place where you are still earning money, and then you can participate in, I don't know, quarterly meetings or monthly meetings. But you need to be committed, fully committed to take a project and create something that will grow. So it is possible to be part of something, but it's not possible to lead something if you are working, because you will need to be fully immersed. There is a lot of energy that you need to invest. So you need to have your mind clear and your objectives like very clear.
After the mining sector, what happened with you? What did you do?
I was in a very good career pathway and everything was good. You know, you make good money when you're working in the mining sector. Everyone knows that. But then I decided to get married. And when I proposed to my wife-to-be, at the moment we had this conversation about, I was away from home a lot because I was traveling to the mining sites, etc. And so that for her, it would be important to have me at home. So we were having this discussion when we were in this Euro trip that we were doing. And coincidentally, this is something that always surprises me, like how life, the universe works. But coincidentally, I had 3 calls. I don't know, I may have got into some headhunters database or something, because it never happened to me like that I got 3 proposals while I was traveling in vacation. And just after having this conversation with my wife-to-be, I had these 3 proposals for other roles. And one of them was with a big pharma company, one of the largest pharma companies in the world. And I just thought it would be a great opportunity for me to learn more about another sector, about an international company. This is a Swiss company, so for sure a different culture than the Peruvian mining company. And also, we were going to have our house like 4 kilometers away from my office. And it really encouraged not only my corporate life, but also my entrepreneurial life, as I understand it now. When you're making life decisions, sometimes you don't know the impact these are going to have in your future. But it was a very good decision.
Okay. So what happened when you finalized the process with the pharmaceutical company?
I had a very good career within the company. I really liked the culture. It was a lot more into my values, or the way that they were doing things, the culture. They had a lot of benefits for the employees, the company car, the traveling, decent working hours, and getting a good paycheck, business trips, etc. You get very comfortable when you're in a position like that. I mean, it's difficult to get away from that. I grew a lot very quickly, taking also more international roles, etc. And then another life situation happened, that my wife at the moment decided to study an MBA in Malta. So being confronted to that, I had the courage to speak to my CEO and tell him that I was quitting the company, because I had to be more present for my wife. So these are very important personal moments that also were defining the pathway. So not only the career, because I know people that sacrifice their families for their careers. I was not ready to do that, and I wanted this balance. So I quit it, and I moved to Malta. But that particular moment got me into thinking, so what can I do now? I'm going to a very different country. I don't know anyone there. It's a country where there is no mining and no pharma and no whatever. So only tourism, which I enjoy, but it's not my field of expertise. And I had this conversation with my CEO, and I told him, hey, what about if we continue collaborating, I can create a structure. And then that was the turning point for me. I saw the light, right? I saw the light because it reminded me of the time I co-founded the editorial house, Lapix, but it was only me. And since at the time I said, well, what I want is to lead, and I want to have more of a saying in the way I structure my company, etc. Of course, I had some savings from mining and pharma experiences. I said, okay, I'm gonna create this company, and then we'll see what happens. A lot of people told me, wow, you're crazy. What are you doing this? You're leaving the comfort of a big company. You could go to another position. I was applying to positions in Europe or whatever. And I saw that people were the majority of the people are more into this safety path and career path, and they don't like risks. They're risk averse. But they tell you that you're crazy for doing such a step, right? For leaving that comfort zone and that particular benefit. And that was the beginning of my entrepreneurial life, my real entrepreneurial life, which was 6 years ago. And I'm completely mistaken to think that I was going to be able to achieve something large by being just me in CAPS, in that consultancy company. The time has taught me that it's good to join forces and to have partners that enrich and bring value to your projects, having your ideas confronted, etc. But at the moment, I thought I could do it by myself. So I created the company, and I was lucky enough to have a couple of contracts to kickstart with a good motivation at that moment. And I arrived in Malta with already ongoing contracts, which is a fantastic thing to do, right? Because it gives you some self-reassurance. But then the void was in front of me. So that risk moment is also very stimulating when you have to think what you want to do.
Well, thank you, Joaquin, for sharing these thoughts and your professional experience. So let's start now talking about the mindset. Let's start comparing both worlds. So what aspects do you think are incompatible between an executive and an entrepreneur?
I really don't think that there is something that is completely incompatible, but there are, of course, very marked differences, because I know some great leaders in corporations that are open to innovation and that have an more entrepreneurial mindset. So that's my first disclaimer, right? I don't think that they are opposite. Sometimes there are things that are very different. The first thing is, when you enter a large corporation, there is a culture. And if you want to change a culture, it's very, very, very difficult when you're in a corporation that has decades or even hundreds of years, 100 years old corporation, and you get into that stream directly because you have all these processes in place and they teach you how to do things. And of course, a lot of things have happened there, right? So you enter a corporation and you get into this sort of matrix where things are already set up. It's good for efficiency. I'm not going to say the contrary. But sometimes when you want to change things, people are a bit afraid. I just had an experience a couple of weeks ago where I saw the difficulty of senior leadership confronting what other even higher leaders are saying, just because they fear for their career paths or something like that. I'm not going to say something very bad about this, because the mindset is your career path. Everyone that gets into a corporation has the career path in front of them, and that's number one interest for them. It's a lie to say that the number one interest for a person is the company's objectives. That's the second. It's because you're measured through this and you're getting a compensation when you get those. But the first is your career path. And that's for the I would say, the vast majority of successful leaders in a corporation. So you live in fear of doing things that are not in the right track. But what they don't get is that sometimes you need to challenge things. I'm saying they don't get. Some of them don't get, and some of them, of course, they get. But a lot of them don't get that. For to be able to be that shining corporate leader that is doing things differently, you need to challenge things sometimes. But the culture it's very difficult. So that's why a lot of companies are investing a lot in the past decade or so into agile methodologies and innovation methodologies, and they have these inside venture funds, etc. But it's not easy because of the interest of the human being that is there.
That's a really good insight, to be honest. And I totally agree with you. When larger organizations, they have a super culture really established. So if you want to change things, it's super difficult. Also, the mindset of the people that wants to keep scaling in their own professional life. So for them, the most important, as you were mentioning.
I'm sorry for being so blunt and so direct and frank with these things. I know that some people may get offended a bit, but it's what I think.
That's why we create this channel, to speak without filters. These are just thoughts.
But there is no shame in this, right? There is no shame. Because what I mentioned at the beginning, and I mention it right now again, is that it's a legitimate choice. I mean, at the end of the day, is what you want to do with your life. If someone wants to have this peace of mind, I have a cousin. Always, he was in the diplomat corps, and he always said, "I want to have an early retirement." And he made it. At 52, he retired, and that is a life accomplishment for him. And I celebrate this because this was his personal objective, right? So why not? They're all good. But if you take an entrepreneurial mindset, and that's where I'm getting to the other side of the story, if you are creating something from scratch, as we did with Boom, for instance, then you need to create everything. There is no certainty. There is no culture. Just the way that you're working. At the beginning, we were the both of us, remember? Just the both of us. So the culture was the interaction between the two of us. And then when we grew and the company started to hire people, it was so difficult to establish processes. But then it was, easy to make shifts or quick shifts. Then things happened at some point that were complicated, but we were able to make quick decisions. And I was speaking to not just today, in the past few years, I have been speaking with a lot of my clients from CAPS, from the consultancy company, and they always say that my company is like the bureaucratic things to get a contract signed or, to start a project being validated, whatever. It can take months. Even though they're investing heavily in agility. For us at a startup, when you're a small group of people and you're starting with something, you say, we're going to do this. And it just takes the decision and the ability of the people to do it. So it's a lot quicker and you can test. And you need to be very, very, very quick and responsive to see if that testing that you're doing is working or not, because you don't have eternal fuel to burn. Your runway is as short as the money that you have in your bank account, right? And you need to be able to react quick. Otherwise, you go to bankruptcy very quick. When you're backed up by a company that's worth hundreds of billions of whatever currency, euros, CHF, US dollars, I mean, you can fail. It's not that bad. You're probably going to lose your job if you fail a lot, but the company is going to be still there, right? So it's very different. That in the mindset is completely different.
Yeah, totally agree. And now that you are mentioning this, it's very interesting to probably go a bit deeply in this. So how do speed and risk-taking differ in large organizations versus startups?
Yes, well, it's a very logical question from what we were speaking, right? Because in my example, I mean, you are in a large organization, you're encouraged now to do some testing and to try out, etc. And they always tell you, don't fear failure, embrace failure, right? That's in vogue. Embrace failure because everything is a learning process. Yes, okay. So of course that's important. You have this safety net, right? But you don't want to fail a lot because you will miss your objectives. Eventually, you can miss your job. So your motivation is about your objectives and your job. Sometimes, if you want to create something new that can have an impact in the organization, it's about exposure or career growth. But I don't know the first person, maybe the owners, that come back to his house and said, well, I made $10 million for the company today. I am super happy. They say, I made the bonus, right? That's it. In a startup, especially when you're the founder, because you're speaking about entrepreneurs, right? Not people engaged in the startup. It's about life. It's about survival. It's like, being the animal in the jungle and you just made it before the lion eats you and you are in your coconut tree sipping some coconut water and you can say, oof, I made it for today, right? It's survival mode at the beginning. You don't have a lot of chances. I mean, you can test, but you don't have a lot of chances of failure. And if you fail, it's over. It's game over. I mean, there is no one going to back you. You can have some people investing in you, whatever, but it's not going to happen forever. I believe that the entrepreneurial mind is more on a survival mode, at least at the beginning. Then you have to go to a growth mode. But first, it's how to create something that really makes you alive. There is a lot more adrenaline. And when you have to make the additional extra hours, you have to make them because no one is going to make them for you. No one is going to make them for you. If you have to cancel that beach trip that you had, you have to cancel it because no one is going to come and take your place. When you're in a large corporation, some people stress because they say, oh, I have this so important position in this squad or whatever. Yeah, but if you're not there, if you have an accident or whatever happens, somebody's going to come or they're going to postpone or whatever. The company is going to be it's going to still be there. So I think that there is a lot more pressure, adrenaline, and risk-taking attitude driven by the fact that you're on a survival mode when you're an entrepreneur, as opposed to risk-averse because you want to maintain your position. Status quo has always been the most easy choice every time, and it's very few the people that challenge the status quo, especially when things are going right. In corporations that are making money, that are profitable, etc. People say, well, why I'm going to change, right?
Well, Joaquin, let's talk about leadership. How does your leadership style change when managing teams in the corporate or in a large organization, and when you were managing a team in a startup?
Well, I think that there are very good leadership skills that you gain when you're in a large organization. Those leadership skills get you into efficiency, setting goals, understanding how to take feedback and give feedback. There's a lot of corporate diplomacy that you learn a lot also. Setting goals or giving the right tools to your team for them to be able to grow. It's something that you learn in good, large organizations. And I'm really thankful for that. I think that is a very good thing that they have, some of them. It also depends on the type of team you're leading or the type of objectives that you have. It's more about having the right tools to create the possibilities of getting people there. And they invest a lot. And this is something that lacks in the startup sphere. Because you have a limited amount of money, right? And you need to see where you're going to put that. Is it going to be in sales, in marketing? Is it going to be in growth? Where? But the first choice is not HR. in your startup, which is, I think it's not good, but sometimes it starts like this. You have these big voids in leadership investments or tools, which you have in corporations. For instance, if you have a very good performing person in your team, you can send him to or her into a course abroad, and that's a motivation, right? It gives them the skills, but also the motivation. When you're in a startup, not funded by a large VC fund, but with angels or whatever, you are not going to send someone to a training in the US or whatever other country because it's not your priority. So you have to live with other types of motivation. You need to be very close to the people because it's a smaller organization, and your leadership needs to be very inspiring, and you need to be there in the front line. But sometimes it's difficult because if your employees come from large organizations, they might be used to other types of benefits, other types of pressure. So working in a startup requires a lot of commitment, and the leadership has to be a lot to inspire people to give a lot for the long run.
That's a good insight. And my second question, it's related to that. So how is the, let's say, management style in each side? What do you think is the main difference? What's the difference having, let's say, a big team or a medium-sized team in the corporate sector on a medium or big-sized team startup?
Well, I really believe that management styles vary, right? It's a lot about your the way that you do things. The environment, of course, imposes something. But for instance, I am a person that loves to give space to the team, and I try to empower them so they make choices. And right at the end of the day, we will see if I am against micromanagement. And this is something that when you have good profiles in a large corporation, it works. If you give them the tools, it can work. In a startup, because of the profiles, maybe it's that. I learned that you cannot give that amount of space, and you need to be more close to the team and what they are producing. Why? Because if they fail, if they fail, you fail. And if you fail, your company fails. So you need to be more aware of what's happening. In a large company, if someone is underperforming, then you will give him a memo, and then you will give him a bad scoring, and then after 2-3 consecutive times, you might have a layoff. Okay, it will impact your goals. Yes, it's not a matter of survival. If you're having a sales team, but if your sales team is not selling, then your company is not making any revenue, and then you might have to close shop, right? So you need to be with them and to tell them every day that they need to sell, and how can you help them? So it's a different approach, I would say. At least I am speaking about my experience in a startup that was not funded by a venture capital, but rather by private investors. Because I guess if you have larger funds, maybe you can have some more space. But there is always a runway. And you know that funds are not unlimited. Even we've seen companies in our sector going bankrupt with large funding behind them. That's something that probably we're going to discuss later, but it's the growth trap, right? That we also made that mistake, the growth trap, when we go too quickly, right? But the thing is, do you have the mirror in the sense that the idea that because you are backed by a large fund, you have an eternal life? Does that give you that injection that calms you, your clonazepam, that calms you, and you're no longer in your survival mode? But it's a trap, because when you're a startup, your funds are limited. So you always need to be alert, and that gives you a different way of approaching your teams.
Even if you are with a VC fund, I mean, always you're looking for investment. You are growing X 10, X probably 20 times, right?
Because they ask for this.
Yeah,
the VC fund will pressure you to. They ask for this.
Well, let's get back to the culture, because I remember you were telling us in the mining company the culture was a bit traditional. Then you went to the pharma sector, and you thought that you belonged to that culture. You felt really good in a startup that it's not in your own country, because Boom was founded in Malta, a totally different country where you grew. So what would be the difference of culture between this pharma company and the startup company?
Yeah, one has to be fair that times have changed and evolved in a very rapid pace in the past years. When I was working in the mining company, remote work was nowhere near the culture of any other company, right? So even in Europe or the US or whatever, maybe some companies were starting to have a bit of that sparkles. But as we went through the pandemic, it became a normal aspect of a company's culture to have remote work. So one has to be fair, comparing experiences, putting them in the right time, right? When I was working in the pharma company, it was the beginning of remote working, and the company was making some efforts to give you 1.5 day of remote work, whatever. Now the same company has a worldwide policy that allows people to do remote working, right? So it has changed a lot. When we started the company, it was just before COVID. We started with a remote culture embedded in the company, because the technology were there. If you think 10 years ago, not everyone had the speed connection or the facility, the easiness to get into a video conference. Now everyone does. So when we started, it was the right time to start with this culture. And also we were hiring people in Latin America, with 7 hours different from when we were. And this is very complicated, because how you ensure that the person you're hiring is complying with all their objectives? How do you ensure that there is no physical office where to go? And what are they doing with their 8 hours shift? Are they really working full steam for 8 hours, or are they going to walk the dog, to say something, at the 11 a.m. in the morning because they don't have a client? We all know the answer to that, because we know how remote work works. So there is something there. You need to be very precise with the motivations. We've seen very loyal people working with us at the startup, and we have to ask ourselves why. Because it's not the same benefit package that you will have at a large corporation, for sure. So what is making them remaining loyal? Why are they still there, giving their most, working more hours without having a fixed schedule, always giving an extra? Because we've touched their lives in a way that I would say a corporation would not be able to. We've transformed their lives by taking them into the startup, in the sense that they are not here for the benefit package, but they are here for a personal goal of development, of learning, of becoming a different person. When you find those profiles, and that's the way that you get into those people and you share with them, they see how you're working. They see that you're not someone doing nothing and just collecting money, but rather you're someone that is not getting a paycheck for 6 months in a row because you need to save money for the company. And they see that, they see your commitment, then they remain loyal there with you because of the big benefit package. So it's not just the way that the company approach the employees or the staff, but also these other non-salary, non-benefit
inspiration, we could say.
Motivation, inspiration, yes, exactly. And it's easier to inspire someone through a startup. Why? Because they see the person that is behind the startup. When you're in a large corporation, if you think about the owners of the company, what do you visualize? What do you visualize when you think about who owns a large corporation in the US or Switzerland or France or whatever other rich country? Who is it that you're serving, right? When you have your boss, the entrepreneur in front of you, and you're working side to side or remotely, whatever, they have a different connection because they see the human behind. That's the difference. You are not the same. You're not trying to achieve the same than a group of shareholders. Some of them actually might be investors, corporate banking, this type of non-personalized investors. So who are you serving, right? Of course, in companies such as a pharma company where you are bringing products to the patients that change patients' lives, you know that your job is having an impact on the health of people. You know that. But at the end of the day, someone is making profit with this. I'm not saying it's bad, it's good. You need to. But right, it's blurred rather than as opposed to you are the inspiration behind. And if you are really doing your job as a leader, inspiring the people, working with them in the front line, you know, generals like Napoleon, they always went to the battlefield and they were always fighting with their troops. It's not that they were staying behind in their palace. That's why he was so inspirational, because the people saw him together with them, right? So I think that that's a very different aspect from leadership in a corporation and in a startup.
Well, let's talk about the challenges, right, and the lessons learned that you have in this fruitful pathway. So tell us any mistake that marked your career in the corporate sector and the mistake that marked your career as a founder.
Okay, I will try to be very concrete about this. A very good, large mistake I made when I was in the corporate sector was to think that the relationship with my boss was always in the benefit of my career. Sometimes your boss doesn't care or even don't want you to grow because of their own interests. So there is this corporate diplomacy or even corporate war. You have to be aware. So you need to play your cards. If you want to be very high up, a lot of things happen in the corporate diplomacy. So I learned that the hard way, right? You cannot rely always in that your boss will help you. And for the startup, the biggest mistake and the biggest learning was the growth trap. When you pass the first value of that, and then you have an MVP validated, and you want to scale because you are thrilled with motivation and you see you're the king of the world, then you invest a lot in growth, maybe expanding into another market, and you don't know what can happen. External things can happen, such as changes in regulations or underperforming, your teams are underperforming, or you start burning money because you believe that if you invest more in marketing and if you invest more in sales, eventually the numbers will pick up. And then you get into this, I think it's a very common trap, right? Where you have passed the critical point, it's very difficult to say, oh, let's stop. Let's make the team leaner, and come back to the health financial structure of the company, because you have already bet a lot. It's a poker game, and you have put a lot of chips into the table, and you say, I'm going to lose a lot. Yes, but sometimes, and that's a very difficult thing to recognize the mistake and say, no, I need to stop. I need to make changes and restructure. There is the human aspect when you need to fire people because your team is too big and you're spending a lot of money in payroll. And you know these people because it's a startup, right? It's a very difficult moment. It took us, I will speak for myself, a lot more time than it should have taken. But that's the lesson. I don't think it's going to happen to me again. I've learned. I learned the hard way. It was very difficult. At the end of the day, we managed to keep the company stable, and it was a very difficult year. But to see when and to realize that you're making this is a growth mistake, right? You're motivated by the way you think things are going to turn out, but you need to be more in your feet and in your reality. So it's a very different thing, you see. When you're in a corporation, you worry about your career path and you worry about your personal growth. And when you're an entrepreneur, you worry about the survival of your company. Both are very important lessons. It only depends where you're standing.
So let's talk about the work-life balance. You were mentioning at the beginning the 8 hours shift time that you used to have in the corporate sector. I have some friends that, they probably live in the company, right, in the office. So my question for you, having this experience, let's say in mining, where those 15 days are 24/7, right, and on pharma, that I would say is as well a complex business, and the entrepreneurial side. How did you handle pressure in both sides?
Yeah. Well, back at my time, it was 20 straight days in the mine. There is a very different approach to pressure because you're living in your work, and you don't have breath, you don't have a time to stop because you're immersed into that. But I would say at the end of the day, you're more tired about the fact that you cannot go back to your house, or that it's a very, very tiring environment, but I wouldn't say that the pressure there is the highest. Maybe for the engineers that are, searching for a new deposit of minerals, but not for the corporate affairs side. As opposed to the pharma company, where I was mentioning that the life to work balance, I'm not sure that I always respected the 8 hours. I'm sure that I worked a lot more than that. But in the end of the day, you will be measured by objectives. I remember when I was at the mine that people were staying up to 10, 11 p.m. at the office because that was the right thing to do, that your boss needs to see that you're sitting there in your desk up to 11 p.m. And you can do that because you're living in a camp, so you don't have anything to do, right? But what are you doing? What are you really doing? So this culture was a bit complex, right? Rather, in the pharma company, it was very much about objectives. So these are smart objectives, and they have KPIs. So when your quarter ends, you will be confronted to your results. So there is a lot of stress, actually, even when you are out of your 8 hours, because you're always thinking, am I going to reach those objectives? And when you're in sales, in the commercial side, it's constant pressure, because you reach your objectives, but then the next cycle starts and you have to reach your objectives again. It's never going to end. And these companies, they always want to set higher growth rates, right? So it's constant pressure, but they have something that they need to make it achievable. Otherwise, people just leave. If you never get your target, you're frustrated and leave, right? So it needs to be achievable. So you need to put in hard work, but then you achieve it. So there are these cycles where there is a bit of stress, and then you achieve it, and you're satisfied because you receive a bonus or a compensation or whatever, because it's achievable. In the startup, it's a lot of uncertainty, and you don't know when you're going to achieve your goals. Sometimes you set your goals and they are not achievable because you don't know, because you're trying. Sometimes you have a lot less resources. And as I said, if you need to work until 3 a.m., you need to work until 3 a.m. because otherwise it just collapses. So the pressure is a lot bigger when you're an entrepreneur. And it gets even bigger when you have a responsibility towards the shareholders, the people that invested in your company. Because when you're speaking from my side, not venture capitalists, but friends that trusted their hard earning money into your venture, because whatever reason, you feel a lot of responsibility about that. And believe me, that is for me, as I was the fundraiser of this first experience that we had, that was for me the biggest stake of pressure. And that's a pressure that you feel at 3 a.m., not because you're working, but because you cannot sleep, thinking about how are you going to say to your friends that the company is not doing great, right? How are you going to take that conversation with people that you know personally? I would say maybe a venture fund could put you into very hard situations, asking you hard questions and make you feel bad if you're not achieving your objectives. But at the end of the day, it's an institution, and they invest in 10, 15 organizations, hoping to get one or two that have that return X times, right? So they know they're going to lose money in some of them. So at the end of the day, it's not that personal. I'm sure there is pressure there. I've never been there. But having your friends investing in your company, that is a hell of a pressure. The biggest pressure I've ever felt, the biggest responsibility I've ever felt. And I really think that you need to be very well prepared for that, because that level of pressure, I've never felt it in the corporate world. Never.
So what would be the first steps? That person should start in the corporate sector in a multinational, or just launch to the water like ducks?
Well, I spoke about my career, and my pathway is very uneven. I would say it's a very non-traditional path. I was changing sectors and going back and forth, and I don't think that someone would be crazy enough to go through that. So I cannot recommend someone to follow my path, actually. What I would say is that if you have it in you that you believe that you want to be an entrepreneur, take the risk, because there is never the right moment to do it, right? I had the chance of having some life-changing situations that pushed me into the pool and start swimming. What would have happened if my wife would have said, I want to stay here, or I want to support your career? I don't know if I would have had the courage to leave that, to leave a comfortable position or a career path that was the successful life people tell you that you need to live, right? So sometimes external pushes or support are necessary. I believe you think the same, right? You need someone or something to happen to make you that. But if you feel it in you, because I always felt it in me, right? Otherwise, I would never have done it. I would have looked for a job as soon as I got out of the corporation in Malta, whatever. But if you have it in you, my advice is test it. And you will see that, because people think that, okay, if I interrupt my career, then it's going to be difficult to come back, or I'm going to lose, I'm not going to be updated with things happening in my sector or whatever. Don't be afraid of that. Don't be afraid of that, because people, they look for you for your capabilities, right? And it's never too late. You're 50, you're 30, you're 25, whatever. It doesn't matter. If you want to do it, try it, because it's the only way to know. Then if you see that it's too big for you, too heavy, quit and look for a job. If you made it once, you're going to make it twice. If you have a solid academic background, you have experience, some companies would even value a lot the fact that you try to be an entrepreneur and for X or whatever reasons you didn't like it, they are sure that when they're having you back, you are more into the culture because you already tried that. But you can also discover something that I discovered, that I wouldn't change anything that I have now. I wouldn't change the uncertainty or the 3 a.m. Wake up moments I had thinking about my investors and friends. Not a single moment I would change them for a corporate life, because I feel free, I feel alive, I feel that I have meaning that I can create, that I've met fabulous people such as you, creating value for society. So this is something that I wouldn't trade for anything.
And Joaquin, what about the skills? I mean, do you recommend the people to gain skills, let's say soft skills, to start in a large organization or jump straight forward to create a new business?
It depends on your academic background as well. I believe that if you do an MBA, you do some type of administration or something oriented to running a company, maybe you will gain some financial skills there or commercial skills there. If you come from a background such as mine, which is more political science or international affairs, I think that you need to gain some other types of skills in order to have something solid to push your startup, right? So maybe you can combine both. I did an MBA afterwards. It's up to how you see it, right? But it's very important to gain some skills. When I founded Lapix at the beginning, I didn't have any skills at all for this.
So let's test now your mindset. Just fire questions and you reply. So tight budget. Do you prefer to cut costs or invest in growth?
Now I prefer to cut costs.
Why?
Because I lived a very difficult situation investing in growth. So for me, it's better to have a financial health to drive growth in a more responsible way.
Ideal team, seniority or versatility?
If I am leading the team, versatility.
One app you can't live without, Slack or Excel?
Excel.
One book that you would recommend?
History of the 19th Century in Europe from Bernstein and Milza.
Wow. Why?
I think it's the book that has impacted me the most in my life. It's a very detailed, it's a very large book. It's a very detailed book of what happened in Europe in the 19th century. And I truly believe that you need to understand what happened in order to better read the present and also the future. For instance, just going to give you a very, very concrete example. Right now, the whole global organizations are being put into test by what is happening at the United States, right? This type of leadership is reshaping alliances. This is not the first time that it happens in the history of the world. How humanity reacted, how that led to other things is something that you need to learn from the past. History of the 19th century in Europe allows you to understand the two world wars and its implications that we're living now. But it's very detailed. This book is very detailed. You understand details of history. And I'm passionate about this. So I think that, well, I'm in the corporate affairs sphere, right? Stakeholder management, strategy, etc. So being informed is the best way to inform about strategies.
Well, thank you. I wasn't expected that.
Yeah, I'm sorry. It's not your typical bestseller from Amazon.
Okay, I think you already gave good advice for the people who wants to start a professional life. You were mentioned that they should focus more in the entrepreneurial side. To finalize this episode, let's talk about your other company, CAPS. So what do you do in CAPS?
CAPS is a company that helps especially large corporations with stakeholder management strategies, which at the end of the day is the only way to create a sustainable growth for companies. You live in an environment, right? You need to know strategically how to approach stakeholders. So that's what we do.
Is it more oriented to large organizations or the startups?
I mean, Our clients are large organizations, but I firmly believe that this is something that applies to any type of organization, regardless of their size.
And where can people follow you or follow CAPS company?
Best way is through LinkedIn, Corporate Affairs Partnering Solutions. And we post some updates there. We have the website and you can get in touch. And also feel free to reach out through LinkedIn. If you write me a message, I saw you in Juan's video, whatever, we can engage and have a nice talk.